Name, date, and bell, upper right-hand corner, the number up at the top and center with the title up at the top and center. Interesting photograph here from the Civil War. A guy named Matthew Brady, and there were some others, went around in their attempts to document the war by filming all kinds of aspects of it, not just dead people on the battlefield, but they would then hold, oh, I guess you'd call them not art shows, but they would have gallery shows in places like New York City, places far away from the fighting. And people for the first time would be able to see this. It wasn't just something you would hear about or read about. These were actual photographs. And it makes you wonder, how did photography affect people's attitudes towards the war? And did it change people's attitudes towards the war and what they thought about war? I do not know the answer to that question, but things change things. Photography, pretty powerful to see the dead bodies instead of just talking about them. By the way, after the Civil War, people were so sick of the killing and talking about it, they just wanted it done, that nobody wanted to buy his photographs, and he ended up going out of business, and I think he pretty much died broke. But anyway, Matthew Brady. If ever you see a photograph of the Civil War, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be Matthew Brady that took the picture. All right, so the war has started, and in war you have these things called theaters, the regions of the country or of the world or of a continent where people are fighting. So you have the East and the West, and in this case, in the East, you have two top generals going at each other, and these guys had a lot in common. First of all, they were, at least in the beginning, Americans. They both went to West Point Military Academy. They both fought in the Mexican-American War. They at least knew of each other, and they both came from well-to-do established families. Robert E. Lee on the left was from Virginia. His dad fought alongside George Washington in the American Revolutionary War. And then after the war, became an alcoholic, squandered the family's fortune, and Robert E. Lee inherited a lot of debt, along with a couple hundred slaves, along with a will from his dad that said within 5 years, all the slaves got to go free. That was common. That Revolutionary War spirit inspired people to release. That's what happened to George Washington. But they were always cautious about it. Like, I'll release the slaves, but after I'm dead, in my will. Well, this was a problem for Robert E. Lee because his dad had squandered the family fortune, and so Lee fought to keep the slaves and to null and void the will. So he's locked in there in Virginia. Well, he was a smart dude, graduates second in his class at West Point. George B. McClellan was from Pennsylvania. His dad was a surgeon. He goes to the University of Pennsylvania, well educated, well connected, and well experienced. He graduated second in his class at West Point. So you have Robert E. Lee, the top general of the armies of the South, in his case, the Army of Northern Virginia. And then you have George B. McClellan, commander of the Army of the Potomac, but that was the main army of the North, there in the Eastern Theater. So what do you put down for this? Well, I don't know, just put Lee was in charge of the North or the South and the Army of Northern Virginia, and McClellan was in charge of the Army of the Potomac. All right, so what are their goals? You can write this down too. So Robert E. Lee's goal primarily at first is to play defense. Hey, this is the idea that we've broken away from the United States. We're forming our own country, and if you just leave us be, we'll leave you be. That's it. And of course, so his goal is just to preserve the Confederacy. It's not to conquer the North or to invade the North. George McClellan, his job is, well, he's got to wrap this thing up. He has to head down south and go after these guys. He has to destroy Lee's army. So Lee plays the role of defender. McClellan is the role of the aggressor. And as the Southerners see it, he's playing the role of the invader. Why, they ask, are you invading our country? Okay, so One more thing I guess I want to mention here is that I don't think I want to mention that. All right, let's move on. So, where does the first battle take place? It takes place in an area called Manassas, Virginia. That's in northern Virginia, near a creek called Bull Run. You can see it over here, Bull Run. So that's where the first conflict takes place. It's about 27 miles outside of Washington, D.C. So for the North, that's a little scary. Washington, D.C. is right there, literally in the South, surrounded by Maryland and Virginia. So McClellan's goal is to go down there. He has about 18,000 soldiers. The South has about 18,000 soldiers. And both sides are thinking, you know what? We're going to lick them. The North feels like the South is just a bunch of ragtag idiots. And the South feels like that the North is full of a bunch of blowhards. So they both go in pretty confident. Well, they meet on the battlefield in 1861, and they go at each other. And it's some pretty tough fighting. Both sides are pretty surprised at how tough the other side is. But they go at it, and they go at it, and they go at it, and it looks like the South might lose. But then reinforcements come. And here's the irony. They come by train. They're unloaded from the trains. They buck up the Southern positions, and they're able to defeat the Northerners, the Union Army on the field. So what's the Union Army forced to do? It's forced to retreat with its head down all the way back to Washington, D.C. And as they're marching back to Washington, D.C., in defeat, blood, mud, a mess, they're not getting cheers. People are just really disappointed. This first real conflict outside of Fort Sumter was not good. And anyone who had any sense at all realized that this was a sign that this war might be a little tougher and a little bit longer than what people had expected. But anyway, the first Battle of Bull Run, about 27 miles outside of D.C., and it is a Union loss. Take the L. Of course, the Southerners, in their opinion, they're like, well, that's what happens when you have spirit. Don't try to invade here again. See ya. Okay, now we're not going into all the battles and conflicts of the Civil War. It would be interesting to do that, but the AP tends to focus on what caused the Civil War and what were the effects of the Civil War, not so much on all the battles. But there are a couple things that are notable that we need to talk about. And one is what you see in this picture right here, the Battle of the Monitor versus Merrimack. This is the deal. You got steam power, and people are always coming up with new innovative ways to do things. So what does the South do? When you're desperate, you kind of tend to be a little bit more inventive and come up with some crazy stuff. So what's happening with the South? They're finding out that all these northern ships, that Anaconda plan? Well, the northern ships are blockading the southern ports. And these ships are powerful, they're big, and they're loaded with cannon. And what can the South do? The South really doesn't have a lot of ships. They feel like they're trapped with this naval blockade. So the South comes up with a pretty clever idea. They take an old ship and they put iron cladding over it. This is all iron right here. And it's the ugliest, darndest looking thing you could imagine. It's steam power. They don't need sails. And what they start doing is they start going up to these big old traditional wooden ships, and the wooden ships fire at them. Clink. And the stuff the cannonballs just bounce off the side of the ironclad ship. These big, old, majestic, amazing, powerful wooden ships can't do a darn thing. Well, you can't really see it right here, but there was a tip to the ship, and what this ironclad could do, this Merrimack, it could ram the big wooden ships and put a hole right in the sides of them. The ship was the weapon. Well, anytime these other traditional ships saw the Merrimack coming, they had to skedaddle out of there. They're like, oh my goodness, that piece of crap, ugly looking thing can take us all out. We're obsolete. they got us on this one. Well, fortunately, the North, they had been working on their own ironclad ship, and they came up with one that was called the Monitor. And again, an ugly looking thing, but it had a cool turret at the top that could spin around and shoot in every direction. So they're like, finish this up, guys. We got to send this down to go face the Merrimack. You're the only thing that will be able to take the Merrimack out. So on the James River, of all places, in 1862, the James River, that should ring a bell. That's where Jamestown was. So the Monitor and Merrimack go at it for a couple hours. Bonk, bonk, bonk. The cannonballs are just bouncing off each other. It ends in a draw. They both go away crippled, but they don't sink each other. Well, the Merrimack can't quite recover, and it's just not enough to keep going at it, and that was that for that. But the amazing thing about this is that the moment those two ships fight, all the wooden navies of the world become obsolete. Now, you guys know the way technology works. It's not like the very next day every ship in the world was an ironclad, but anyone with any sense at all could see that the future navies of the world would have to be made of iron ships. Wooden ships just weren't going to cut it anymore. Okay, that's out east. Some very exciting things out east. What about out west? Well, in the Western theater, the goal is to get control of the Mississippi River. And that means you're going to have to attack certain towns and forts along the Mississippi River. And the idea, remember the Anaconda Plan, was to cut the Confederacy in half. So who's the guy that's put in charge out there? Well, eventually it's a guy by the name of Ulysses Grant. Of all things, his initials are U.S., of course. U.S. Grant, and you can tell by his picture right there. U.S. Grant was a little rough around the edges compared to Lee and compared to McClellan in the East. He didn't have the, what would you call it, the pedigree. He didn't come from the upper classes. He came from Ohio. And he was just more of a simple kind of guy. Now, he did graduate from West Point, but he was like 21 out of 39, so he wasn't the smartest kid there. But he went to West Point, so that's something. So let's not give him credit for that. So he goes out, and he didn't have the best reputation. Some people said he was a drunk. He liked to smoke cigars all the time, and he was just rough around the edges. But kind of interesting to show you how weird the country was at this time. His family was an abolitionist family from Ohio, of course. By the way, Ohio at that time, since it was so involved in industry and trade, Cincinnati was such a booming city, it really felt more like it had a lot in common with New England than it did the rest of the Midwest at that time. And so there were a lot of reformers that lived in Ohio, and abolitionism was pretty big in Ohio. In any case, he's from an abolitionist family, and to kind of give you an idea of this guy, as rough as he might have been, he married a girl from the South who was from a slave-owning family, and his parents wouldn't attend the wedding because of that. So that shows you how divided the nation could be, not even attending the wedding. Now, when they got married,